All right, so everyone settle down, right? All of you are here, so welcome to our lecture 5, right? So it almost feels like the final lecture, but it's not. So we're halfway through, right? Lecture 5 on sexual behavior. So just start things off. That's the first thing. So sexual development, I really think this is very important, extremely important. So it actually took me a few years to get this thing into my head, right? The definition. So I think a lot of you don't know this, but it's very, very, very good to know this. So every time we talk about sex, okay, it's not just behavior, of course. Yeah, it refers to the biological aspects. So we're really talking about biology, the organs, development, the chemistry involved. But gender is very different. So gender is a psychological definition, right? Psychological construct. So whenever we talk about gender, we're talking about the social, learned, personal aspects. So strictly speaking, if you're writing a paper, okay, you're writing a paper, you're really concentrating on differences between males and females. The right word to use is sex differences, not gender differences. I use sex differences in virtually all my papers, but sometimes I do gender because it seems that gender sounds more neutral. But if you're really concentrating on differences between males and females, it's sex, right? And the last bullet point is that we'll come to it later, right? So it also interacts with environmental factors. So sex differences can come in with respect to anatomy, right, that we saw it, okay, shoulders, height, skeleton, muscle mass, immune activation, taste and touch sensitivity, liver metabolism. So just for everybody's benefit of general knowledge, so the most primary difference between males and females, the most salient difference, okay, refers to upper body strength. So I'm essentially talking about bullet number 2, 3, and 4. So shoulders, height, total skeletal muscle mass. So these 3 differences are the most prominent difference. Irrespective of whether it's mental or physical, these are the 3 most prominent differences here. And however, but do know when it comes to height, it's a difference of degree or magnitude. It's not a difference of type or category. So that's what we call dimorphism. Okay, morphism always refers to structural aspects. So they're not males and females are not designed, they're not built to differ structurally by nature. It's actually a lot of it are due to nutrition, environmental influences, right? That's why we see the intersection zone, right? So sometimes we do have women who are taller than males, of course. We look at Tom Cruise. I'm not too sure the lady standing next to him, right? Yeah, so it does happen. So human genome, this one is a revision of a secondary school textbook, right? So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So altogether we have 46 chromosomes for healthy individuals. And an individual's genetic sex, right? It starts with sex chromosomes inherited from our parents. Mother always provide an X, and fathers always provide an Y, a Y or an X. And XX, right, refers to a female, XY refers to a male, basic knowledge. So now we turn to something that's a bit unusual, right? So in girls, females, we have this thing called Turner syndrome, 1 out of 2,000 births. Right? So I'll repeat this in tutorial, but do remember it's an X, okay, single X. So the 46th chromosome, the X chromosome, is missing. So normally, the intelligence is pretty much normal, but they are pretty much short. They can have spatial deficits. They can lead to infertility, even though they have normal external genitalia. Okay, now we turn to males, right, or boys. And this Klinefelter syndrome, right, if you times it by 2, then it's like 3.6, right, in 2,000 male births. So it's slightly more common than Turner syndrome. So it leads to males with reduced fertility, and that requires hormone therapy treatment. No good, right? Normal intelligence but social awkwardness, a bit like Turner syndrome, right? And delay of reduced verbal skills. Partly because of the extra Y chromosome. Yeah, not very good. And then Jacob's syndrome is an additional Y chromosome, and a little bit more rarer compared to Klinefelter. So it's 2 out of 2,000, 1 in 1,000. So very subtle, hard to notice physical and behavior relationships. So it's very hard to tie the physical appearances with behavioral abnormalities. So they are usually taller, leaner, a lot of acne because of the extra Y chromosome, and slightly below intelligence. Okay, not good to have, right? Again, they have verbal difficulties, ASD. Okay. So now we turn what's the importance of sex chromosome, right? Very important slide here, the 3 stages of prenatal development. Okay, I'll put an asterisk here, put an asterisk there, or highlight this. Right? A lot of information, right? So I just want to start with, after 6 weeks of gestation, this is what happens, right? So we have this SRY gene that produces testis determining factor, so which is a protein, and then the protein will form testes. Right. For female embryos, what happens is that we have 2 different genes, okay, WNT4, DAXY gene. They produce ovaries. And then later on, it's during the 3rd gestational month, right? Okay, that's from conception. A male embryo's testes will start to secrete testosterone, and then we have this anti-Mullerian hormone, right? So testosterone, we need it to develop the Wolffian system, right? Ultimately, that will grow into the external genitalia and some internal genitalia. And the anti-Mullerian, we have to break down the Mullerian system. Mullerian system is really for ladies, right? For females. So, yeah. So initially, at first, right, both males and females, they will have both kinds of systems, both Wolffian and Mullerian. However, it's just that in males, for all of the guys here, right, the Wolffian system will develop into seminal vesicles, all this genitalia, and the prostate gland, right? Ultimately, is one of the last important internal genitalia to develop. Okay. And however, all these parts, okay, they will degenerate, okay, all this internal genitalia, they will degenerate in female embryos. Yeah, they'll be broken down. And the Mullerian system will develop into the uterus to replace them, okay, to replace all this male genitalia, right, into uterus, upper vagina, fallopian tubes, yeah. And so for males, additionally, we need androgens, so 5-alpha dehydrotestosterone, okay, we need that to masculinize male genitalia, right. So androgens, of course, testosterone is pretty much the most major androgen. That's whenever we talk about guys, being violent, being angry, we're always thinking about testosterone. Right? So again, so this is an elaboration of the previous slide. After the 6 weeks of gestation, we have this TDF, right, that begins to turn into undifferentiated gonads into testes in males. Again, we have testosterone. Okay, we have anti-Mullerian hormone secreted by the male embryo's testes. So very interestingly, we have something called androgen insensitivity syndrome, AIS. It's pretty widely reported in the sporting circles because of this person. Okay, I think he or she has been banned, depending on how you want to call this kind of person. So what happens is that there's this lack of functional androgen receptors. And they couldn't really respond that well to testosterone and other androgens. So they are males, genetically speaking, they're born to be males, but phenotypically they are females with female genitalia. So very complicated, and this person actually, genetically he's actually a male, but he competed with the other females and beat them hands down in running. I cannot remember which is it 400 or 500, but yeah, he really beats them hands down. And then there was a huge debate, that we shouldn't have such people competing with all the other female athletes. Extremely unfair. And now we turn to CAH. Okay, this is contrast, and this is in contrast to what we have, AIS, right? So AIS, we just go back, right? So it's a lack of functional androgen receptors. Something is wrong with the androgen receptors. These people, they have elevated levels of fetal androgens, right, from the adrenal gland during the 2nd trimester of pregnancy. So the female fetuses, they tend to be so-called masculinized and, structurally speaking, right? So they can be born with such ambiguous external genitalia, okay, image 3 below. And that's from our textbook. For more specific details, you guys can read it, right? So it's almost like a mini penis developing. Not good to have, yeah. So yeah, such people do exist, right? Yeah. Okay. And then we have this secondary sexual characteristics, right? Development and puberty, starting with the HPG axis. Okay, very long word, I know. And then we have this GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone that secretes about hypothalamus, important for growth. Right. Then we have FSH and LH. They exert different effects in males and females. So in secondary school, usually what we learn is that FSH and LH is part of menstrual cycle. We didn't learn that it's important for males. It is important for males, right? Okay. So yeah, so our testes, okay, during this development, it will start to secrete testosterone and small amounts of estrogens, right? So yeah, so guys, we do have estrogens. And ovaries, it's primarily secreting estradiol, right? And small amounts of androgens, right, including testosterone, right, for ladies. And development and puberty continued. So in males, we have all this physical development, muscles, facial hair, enlargement of larynx, right, deeper voice. So females, everybody know this, right? Breast growth, uterus development, fat distribution, changes in fat distribution quantity. In both sexes, that's when our external sex organs, genitalia, starts to mature, right? Okay, now we talk about sex differences in hormones, brain structure, behavior. Okay, so these are the three things. So we have continued expression of genes on both X and Y chromosome. Later on, we'll talk about what happens in the brain. We'll talk about sex hormones. We'll talk about epigenetics, right? Gene types, environment influences, right? So here we have organizing roles of sex hormones. This is also in one of our tutorial slides, okay, just to stress on this. Very important for general knowledge, okay? So both organizational and activational roles, so it's like 6 to 24 weeks. So essentially it's about 1 to 4 months after conception, and then mother's womb, right? And then a period beginning shortly before birth, extending all the way until like 1 year old, 12 months. And puberty, of course, is what we talked about in the previous slides, right? So organizational changes, we're always talking about permanent changes, and activational changes are pretty much reversible, right? So one is supposed to be permanent, the other is supposed to be non-permanent. Simple as that. And here we talk about steroids, the synthesis of human sex hormones. Essentially, they're all steroids, right? So they're producing gonads, as well as adrenal glands, brain, bone, fat cells. And they're all made from cholesterol, okay, which we get from eggs, right? So just be mindful of the cycle, right? So it's from cholesterol to progesterone, then we get progesterone all the way until testosterone. Yes, and we need testosterone to get estradiol. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So this is something to take note of, right? Yeah. Aromatization. Yeah. So for people who are extra feminine, they have this aromatization process kicking in. So more estradiol than usual. Yeah. Okay, right, and then we have this thing called sexual dimorphism. Yeah, which is just an extension of our differences in height. That's like. So whenever we talk about dimorphism, we're talking about structural differences, right? So di means between, right? So between the two sexes. And specifically, we want to talk about it in the brain in the following slides. Okay. So in female neonates, the newborns, so we have estradiol, we have progesterone, and that leads to feminization. Okay, feminization and masculinization. We're talking about sex-type behaviors, okay, behaviorally oriented. So in male neonates, we have testosterone promoting masculinization. And estradiol, yes, we do have estradiol, right? Promotes defeminization. So that's like really, it's kind of inhibitory, right? It's suppressing male typical behaviors. And now we come to this very interesting slide, okay? The first one of all these markers of prenatal hormone environment. So take note why we do such studies, because of ethical constraints, yeah? It does not really allow artificial manipulation of this prenatal hormonal environment. So we have to look at, the structural outcome, physical outcomes. And so this is one of the most easy to spot, right? 2D to 4D ratio. So as I mentioned in today's first tutorial, so our 2D is our index finger, second digit. Our 4D is our ring finger, right? And high testosterone and lower estrogen levels, it gives rise to this masculine pattern of this relatively lower 2D to 4D ratio. And this so-called lower 2D to 4D ratio is a good thing for men, yeah. So it kind of predicts better sports performance, competitive ability, left-handedness, and unfortunately ASD, okay? However, this is controversial because this is a kind of correlational evidence, and we don't really know the mediating factors. Yeah, hard to spot. So the next one, which is a bit more reliable, that really stands up to replication, I would say. This one is much more convincing. So this is otoacoustic emissions that females tend to secrete, not secrete, so tend to emit more, okay? Louder and more frequent in females. And that makes females more sensitive to noise than men, right, on average. So this also related to was related to sex differences in prenatal hormonal levels, prenatal testosterone. So sometimes having more testosterone is not a good thing. Yeah. So we can see it from here, right? So females have higher this mean otoacoustic emissions, right, than males in both years. And now we talk about the brain, finally, right? Sexual dimorphism in the brain. Unfortunately, it's a lot of this work is focused on rats, not so much on humans, right? So we have this SDMPOA, sexually dimorphic nucleus of the preoptic area. What a name, yeah? In the hypothalamus of the rat, yeah. So it's 2 times larger in males, right? And then we have this spinal nucleus of the bulbocavernosus, SMB, right? Yeah. So the bulbocavernosus muscles, they are found in the rat's penis, the male rat's penis, right? So we need all this so-called SMB, right, to innervate the penis of the rat, of the male rat, right? So it's more SMB neuron in male rats than in female rats. So if there's this lesion done to this nucleus, some kind of bad treatment of this nucleus, the male rat will have reproductive problems, right? So in humans, what we have, the equivalent of the SDMPOA is this INAH, which stands for interstitial nuclei of the anterior hypothalamus, right? It's a nuclei, right? So which means that it's more than one nucleus, 1 to 4. And then specifically like 2 and 3 are 2 times larger in males than in females. So this is highly similar to the SDMPOA, right? 2 times larger in males than in females. Right? And INAH3 is highly important for sexual orientation. So which we will get to from this slide onwards on transsexuality, right? We'll talk more about it in our tutorial. So it happens when an individual's gender identity, which is really a self-concept of whether I'm male or female, is inconsistent with his innate biological sex. And the brain differences are more in line with gender identity than with biological sex. Yeah, so this is an interesting fact. Yeah. So now we look at all these monkeys. These are vulvet monkeys from South America. So by themselves, before we talk about monkeys, okay, children of humans, okay, we like to prefer sex-type toys between ages of 12 and 18 months, right? So that's 1 to 1.5 years old, right? So guys would like to play with cars, right? Plastic cars, guns, and girls would like to play with dolls, right? So by themselves, okay, the parents did not force them to. Okay. Similarly, this is also observing all these vulvet monkeys in the absence of human-like gender socialization. So this is something to take note of. Okay, they're not forced to take up such gender-type or sex-type behaviors. And why is this so? Right? So it's kind of related to our the hormonal environment as well, prenatal. So there's this androgen exposure, right? So boys experience 2.5 times more androgens than girls. Okay, this is taken as a fact. And boys with CAH, remember what I talked about, right? Elevated levels of androgen, right? They have more of such androgens than healthy boys, right? So boys with normal, regular levels of androgens. And girls with CAH, they have more androgens than healthy girls, right? So, and then interestingly, girls with CAH then spend more time with boys' toys than healthy girls, but less than boys with CAH. Yeah, so they will spend more time playing with a car, okay, than other girls, but still they don't play at the same level as boys with CAH. Yeah, so the boys with CAH have the most amount of androgens. Yeah. And girls with CAH also spend less time with girls' toys. Okay, this is what we want to find, and this is found. Right, less time playing with dolls than healthy girls. Not surprising. Okay, this part is part of my research many years ago, right? But I don't link this spatial and verbal cognition to hormones. It's more like to other psychological variables. But this is pretty much a well-replicated finding. So we do have a slight male advantage on visual spatial tasks, especially a task like the one on the right. This is a usual mental rotation task. It's called Vandenberg mental rotation task. It's created in the 70s. Still used today, but today this is more like a virtual reality version. And when it started, it's a pen and paper. Yeah. So slight female advantage on verbal tasks. So females tend to be more fluent verbally. They tend to remember more words. Yeah. So this may be linked to sex differences in levels of testosterone and estrogen. Yeah. So this is a well-replicated finding. I do agree with this thing. Okay, it's pretty legit. Testosterone supplements in older men improve their performance on spatial tasks. Right. Mentioned in our textbook. And women scored higher on spatial tasks when testosterone levels were high, lower when estrogen levels were high. Yes. Not for men. This is really for women. Okay, take note. Okay. Estrogen levels were too high for men is not a good thing. It will harm performance on such spatial tasks. And better scores on verbal fluency and manual dexterity related to higher levels of estrogen. Okay, in men, surprisingly, it's not estrogen. It's higher levels of testosterone, right? It will give them better verbal scores. All right, so this is a bit controversial, right? I'm not too sure about this, right? Okay, now let's talk about this fetal testosterone and empathy, right? This is really from our textbook. So we get to see a negative correlation. Unfortunately, the R value is not shown. I think it should be R equals to 0.3 or 0.4, right? So basically, the higher our empathy score is, the lower our this fetal testosterone will be, yeah. So it makes a lot of sense. So boys, okay, colored in blue, and girls are kind of colored in red. So boys generally, they have lower empathy ratings. And of course, it's because it's also correlated with the higher testosterone than girls. All right, yeah, take note of this. This is correlational finding. Does not really imply causation. And now we talk about this sex differences in autism spectrum disorder, ASD. And so it's a general knowledge, again, for everybody. It's a extremely highly masculine disorder, okay, 4:1 male-female ratio. And what more do I want to say? Yeah, so it's, take note, so that's pretty much the only thing I want to emphasize on. It's a highly masculine disorder. So for guys, generally for this, for the young children, I kind of, took care of when I was a social worker. They're almost all guys. Yeah, I haven't really, nursed a young female. Yeah. So now we turn to sexual orientation. So this, the rainbow flag, right, stands for the LGBTQ movement, right? There is a Q, okay, by the way, yeah. I'm not going to tell you guys what it stands for. You guys can look it up, right? Very interesting, okay? So it's LGBTQ, so we have 5 colors, not 4, right? That's why on this flag, it almost seems that we have 6 colors, yeah. Okay, so basically it's a kind of stable pattern of attraction to members of a particular sex, okay, when we talk about sex orientation. So usually most of us are heterosexual, and some of us are kind of bisexual, so it means that you like both sexes, okay, and then it's usually measured using questionnaires, okay, like this Kinsey scale, very famous scale, right? And then however, it doesn't really necessarily, this sexual orientation, not necessarily related to displayed sexual behavior. Okay, yeah. So whatever you say does not really mean that you actually do, that thing, yeah. Whatever it is, right? And early exposure to androgens influences adult sexual behavior. Again, we have all these markers, developmental and biological markers, SD and POA, that's what we talk about. And we talk about, now we talk about birth order, right? Just now we talk about otoacoustic emissions, yes. We also talk about 2D/4D ratio. And birth order, this is also a little bit controversial. Yeah, but yeah, it's kind of believed, right? It's kind of found out that men who have older brothers are more likely to be homosexual. Yeah. Okay, controversial finding, but yeah, take note, we do have such findings. Okay, now we look at this otoacoustic emissions again. This is very interesting finding. Now I'll elaborate on this a bit more. So we have no differences between bisexual, homosexual men and heterosexual men. Right. However, when we look at women, right, so bisexual and homosexual, we do have lower emissions, right, in this otoacoustic emission compared to heterosexual women, right? So it's at the midway point, I would say, when what I encapsulated in a rectangle. It's somewhere at the midway point between heterosexual women and all the men. Just take note of that, right? And similarly, right, for this 2D/4D ratio, when we look at the homosexual women again, yeah, it is lower, but it's only lower than the heterosexual women, right, compared to other women. It is still higher than the men. Yeah, which therefore, the findings are not very clean. findings are not very clear-cut, right? And I'm not too sure of the standard deviation, the standard error bars. Okay, it's not really shown on this graph and the previous one, so it's hard to make assessment concerning significance. Okay, now we come to brain structure, right? So this is our interstitial nucleus of the anterior hypothalamus 3. Yeah? So it's 2 to 3 times larger in heterosexual men than in homosexual men. Yeah? So it's done by this person, Dr. Simon LeVay. Yeah? So for the details, you guys can read the textbook. Yeah? So it's actually traced. Yeah? We can actually trace all this homosexuality tendencies, preferences, right, to this brain structure. Yeah. But then again, this is also a correlational finding. It doesn't really mean that, that this portion, INAH3, you have it smaller, you will become a homosexual. Okay, I don't think it's that easily explained. Yeah. Okay, now we talk this part, okay, pretty much the last part, I believe. Okay, attraction, romantic love, sexual desire, parenting. Yeah, okay, so this is more like a social psychology kind of section. So, in a lot of different cultures, we also like to ask, what or who is attractive. So all these different cultures, they have their own definition of physical beauty. So in this case, this is the non-neck, right? I think this is from one of the South American countries. I cannot really remember. Right? So, and then a preference for beauty is evident at a very early age, right? Before the media and other cultural factors have had a chance to influence perceptions. So this suggests something is very intrinsic, something innate is happening. So is there a common element across different cultures, different countries? And in social psychology, right? So this is from social psychology. This is not really from neuroscience. Okay. So the common belief is that symmetry, right? Symmetry of our faces are highly important, and our perception of symmetry, facial symmetry, is very subconscious. Okay, it's like we know it, but we don't really know how to describe it, right? Like this Brad Pitt person. To Western eyes, he's seen as very attractive, but to me, he's just a very old person right now. He's an old man. It's pretty much over for him. Yeah. So, and then the symmetry is just, facial symmetry is perceived as related to good health, and it assists us subconsciously with choosing a healthy mate. Yep. And then this is also a very popular social psychology finding. I'm sure that a lot of you actually know this, for those of you who attended social psychology. So this study has been replicated, I think. Yeah. So women prefer men with masculine facial features for one-night stand. That's like upper row on the right. But less masculine features for long-term relationships. All right. So the lower row, yeah, doesn't really look different to me, to be honest. Okay. And then, masculine features are normally associated with a male being dominant, less faithful, having colder personalities, worse parenting skills, etc. However, you also indicate that the person may have good immune system and possibly so-called good genes, okay, good genes to be an assertive and strong partner. And now we have something called smell preferences, okay, another very unconscious factor. It's called this MHC genes, so major histocompatibility complex. Yeah, again, it's a very long word, right? So it codes for this immune system ability to recognize intruders. So what our author wrote is that having different MHC profiles, genetic profiles, making us having the ability, right, to sense different MHC profiles, is a good thing. It's a good thing, right? So it actually will make us more vigilant and will make us more eager, right, to have a mate with a different body odor from us. And that can lead to the production of stronger immune system for offspring, right? So this is like a kind of lengthy logic, okay, a bit convoluted, I would say. But the last point I totally believe, okay, so there's this use of oral contraceptives in women. It can cause them to become less capable of selecting partners on the basis of MHC profiles. This is 100% true for people working in the pornographic industry, right? So for porn actors and porn actresses, this one is 100% true because they use contraceptives and they use sex strengtheners, like Viagra, all that related product, nitric oxide products. So it really affects, right? It really affects the ability to select stable romantic partners. Because once you have, too much sex with too many different people, I mean, really, you're just opening up your body. You're messing up all the hormones in your body. Yeah. So not a good thing to have. Yeah. Yeah. So now we talk about this thing, okay, romantic love, sexual desire. I'm sure everybody knows this, right? So romantic love is, you want to think about long-term relationship, right? Sexual desire, no. Sexual desire is more like the behavior itself, okay? It's for mating, for reproduction. And believe it or not, okay, we do have different parts of the insula, right? So insula, you can see as an internal cortex that's lying embedded within our neocortex. So the frontal region, the rostral region is involved in romantic love, and then the caudal posterior region is involved in sexual desire. So yeah, the rostral region is kind of preferred, yeah? If you want to find someone who is more loyal to you, you need to look at his brain and see whether the rostral regions are activated, yeah? So this part is also very interesting, brain activity and love, study by this 2,000 people, right, Bartels and Zeki. So they look at photos of friends and lovers, right? Again, this is like social psych study, okay? Except they use fMRI, right? But the study itself is social psych. So when viewing lovers, we have all these reward regions, okay, the ones that I talked about already, right? We have insula and then basal ganglia. They show increased fMRI activations. And however, when viewing a loved ones, okay, the fMRI activation decrease in all this PFC, cingulate cortex region, okay? Those regions are involved in executive functioning, right? Or memory, emotion regulation as well, right? So it's not so active. Yeah. So basically, it just makes you more blind. Yeah. You're not really exercising your cognitive judgment when you're looking about your lover. Yeah. Okay. Now next slide here: romantic love, sexual desire. I know that some of you are writing on these two hormones. Okay, oxytocin. Yeah. And then we have vasopressin, right? It's also called this ADH, stands for anti-diuretic hormone, right? So both of these hormones are secreted by our pituitary gland. And this pituitary gland is found attached to our hypothalamus, remember? And then oxytocin, as we talk about in our drug lecture, right? So it is the so-called love hormone, and it correlates with this enhanced bonding between couples. And oxytocin is generally released during childbirth, also released during sex, right? In both sexes, regardless of whether you're a guy or female, right? Yeah. But the second part is always the case. I know usually that's what people remember oxytocin for. Okay, released during childbirth to really relax the mother. Okay, now we talk a little bit more about this parenting. So, the simple goal of sexual behavior, as mentioned by our author, is to produce offspring who can survive, who will survive to reproduce, right? So I'm sure a lot of you have read about this, okay? Intro to Psych, Social Psych. So males are capable of producing many offspring, right? Because males can secrete testosterone until a very old age, okay? Even after retirement, okay? 60, 70. If the person is healthy, have no difficulty, right? With all this testosterone secretion. However, for females, right? There will be something like menopause, right? And then they also bear long pregnancy and care of offspring. So females, evolutionary speaking, they have to be more selective, less promiscuous. And then monogamy is favored for safety and protection of offspring, okay, for mothers. And higher hormones, oxytocin and vasopressin, highly important, okay, found in rodents, right? For sustaining monogamous relationship, behavior, yeah. And then we also have this shot of oxytocin, there's a lot of such funny going social site experiments. So you will increase the comfortable distance for interacting with attractive strangers, but very, very non-intuitively, it only increases attractiveness ratings of one's own partner, only, So you will not really increase a person's rating of the attractive stranger. This is very ionic, It's more like a cognitive dissonance to me. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this lecture, right? So I just want to say, everybody do attend your tutorials. For those of you who can come, right, not really rushing, please attend. I'll have a quick revision with all of you. And bring your textbook, okay? Bring your textbook. Please bring your textbook for revision. Thanks, everyone.